your family and to hear him talk of you as well, Robert. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to raise the lights so we can see your lovely faces and extend the conversation. So if any of you have any questions, which I'm sure you will have, we have the lights a little bit higher actually, that would be wonderful if that's possible. Perfect, so we can see. And put your hand up and the stewards will run as fast as they can to you and we will take questions from the floor. Let's have a question over here. Microphone over here, and then get the other microphone up there. Great.
Hello. We're from West Wales, but my wife here is from Port Talbot and her father was from Cheltenham. Whenever I go there now, we go quite regularly, I was there a few weeks ago, as an outsider I suppose, because I'm English. I'm always totally impressed by the sheer amount of talent that has come out of that area, not just Richard Burton, but other people, even to this day, people like Michael Sheen, in that sort of close geographical area. And I wondered if you thought there was a reason for that, something to do with the Welsh culture.
Yeah, as a Newportonian, I would like to point out that Michael Sheen was born in Newport. But no, I think that's a very good point, and one of the fantastic things I think about the schoolboy diary that Richard kept, that is in the book, is that it reveals so much of the culture of his hometown. Sir John Gielgud is quoted quite often as saying that Richard came from nowhere, and of course, in a certain sense, in terms of his dramatic training and so on, he didn't go through drama school. There's a truth to that, but at the same time, of course, Richard did come from a very particular kind of mining culture, industrial culture, a performative culture. Rhiannon mentioned performing in Eisteddfodau. Richard was, of course, brought up in a chapel culture. I gave a talk in Port Talbot a few weeks ago, and somebody came up at the end and said that they could remember being taught Sunday school by Richard when he was dressed in his RAF uniform. So he was back for the weekend and doing these Sunday school lessons, which is somewhat incongruous given his later reputation. So it was a very vibrant culture in which people were interested in drama, and Philip Burton, Leo Lewis. There were a range of key people, Meredith Jones, the teacher, who brought young talent through, and there was no sense of being defeated. This was a society that had been through the 20s and 30s, which were very, very tough times in South Wales, but there was still enormous self-belief. And I think one of the things that I take from Richard's diary at that time, and indeed from his whole life, is that he obviously did have self-doubt, but it was about a different kind of range of issues. He had no doubt that he had the ability to mix with the aristocracy in Oxford and to go to Hollywood and to have a presence there and to be himself in those settings. And I think he took the best elements out of that South Wales culture of that time.
Can I add that Rich took me several times down to Wales, and I met on various occasions, I think, all his family. And I came away and retain now the feeling of a family of extraordinary nobility. Not the nobility of, as I've written somewhere, but the nobility of a culture, of a race. And whether it was particular to his family, but really a family of great style.
Yeah, you were saying earlier that he would be so proud because you live in Oxford, and in fact your husband is an Oxford Don.
Yes, yes. Well, Rich would be so proud because Brian, my husband, became Professor of Music in 1989 at Oxford. And I thought, oh, if only Rich, he'd get the reflected glory, he would have loved that. And to be.
Question over here. I think there's a microphone over here somewhere.
Right, thank you very much.
Nice.
You say very little in this talk, anyhow, about the love-hate relationship between Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. I'm very interested in your observations of how the sparks flew and just what made it such a special and such a difficult relationship.
Where should we start with this? Perhaps, Robert, you might like to begin here.
Let me see if I can find a quote that I marked up in case this came up. Be patient for a moment. Bliss? No, that's not it. Although, I mean, it was a mighty love.
Perhaps while Robert is looking for that, I could just say that I was struck reading the diaries at how tender the relationship was, how well Elizabeth comes out of the pages of the diaries, immensely warm and loving person, and there's no doubt, I think, reading the entries, that was a genuine love. You know, some commentators have said, oh, Richard only married Elizabeth to be famous, to be rich, and you know, he was only interested in money. You don't get that impression reading the diaries at all.
To me, I was very interested in some beautiful passages in the diary, wonderful entries. But I came away feeling very, very sad. And lots of the relationship between Elizabeth and Richard was certainly fine. But I got a headache at times thinking, this is George, is it George and Martha? It was George and Martha, and I want to say, shut up. It is so vivid, isn't it?
It is, and Sally Burton, Richard's widow, said to me when she was reading the diaries in proof that when she was reading the diaries for 1971, she got very cross with Elizabeth because Richard was trying to control his drinking, and Elizabeth wasn't trying to control her drinking, and she felt that Elizabeth could have done a lot more to help Richard at that particular time in his life. And of course, within about 6 months after the death of Richard's brother Ivor, Richard's life really goes into a very sharp downward spiral. So it is painful, it is tragic in that respect. But I think somewhere Richard does say that they've been together for, I think, 9 years, and he said that's a pretty good record in our business. That actually living the kind of life they did in the spotlight, the demands on them, the pressures on them, that they had sustained that love for 9 years, and of course they would continue to be very close for really the rest of Richard's life.
She seemed to be the only person that didn't bore him at all. He was constantly wanting to see her when she was away.
But he was bored. He says so in the diaries in various places. He does.
I found a bit of trouble between the two of them, but I've just my eye lit on this too, on the same page. He says the trouble with total sobriety, picking up with what you were saying, but he did from time to time, and occasionally for months and months together, actually lay off. The trouble with total sobriety is if you are a born misanthrope, and if your base is an essential cynicism, and my birth and base are both, you do not see the world through a glass darkly, and in my case, a glass of alcohol, but suddenly face to face. That's quite revealing, I think. And then there's this bit about there's somebody else with them, the two are together, and there's somebody called Norma also present. And I said, there's somebody who could never, there's somebody, says Rich, who could never give up drink, pointing at Elizabeth. Whereupon she said, she, hated my guts and furthermore disliked me savagely. Ah, said little stirrer-up Norma. But you do love him, don't you? No, said Elizabeth. And I wish to Christ he'd get out of my life. It's been growing on me for a long time. Piss off out of my sight, she added. So like the Arab, I picked up my tent and stole silently away up here, my tent being the typewriter. There are lots of bits like that, but I don't think they take away from the fact that it was a passionate and profound adoration on both sides. I mean, long after Rich died, I saw Elizabeth very shortly before she died, and she had come to give a bust of to the
Royal Welsh College.
Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama. And she asked me what I was doing there, and I said I'd written a piece about Rich, which I was getting ready to do. And when I came down from reading this piece that I'd written, which was a sort of little encouragement about what I could remember of our best times together, she said, "Oh, thank you so much, oh, that was marvellous." So she burnt with a fire of love for me right to the end, although she'd been through several other marriages.
Rhiannon, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? Let's have one final question. I think there must be a question right at the back over here, yes.
Hi. Back at the house I've got a collection of Welsh sports writing, and in it there's a very, very funny piece by Richard Burton called "The Last Time I Played Rugby," when he attempts to sneak home to Welsh Valleys when he's 28, he's playing Hamlets in London, to play incognito a game of rugby. And he realised the game's up when he runs onto the pitch and he hears one of the opposition say, "So which one's the bloody film star then?" And things kind of go downhill from there. And it's really, really funny and very well written, and I've raved about it for years to anybody prepared to listen. And I've looked around here and there to find anything else that he's published in his lifetime, and there's really very little out there. So given that he clearly enjoyed writing and he had a tremendous talent for it, why didn't he publish more while he was alive?
He did publish about, I think, a dozen articles in newspapers, magazines. There's the Christmas story, there's the piece Meeting Mrs. Jenkins, when he recalls his meeting with Elizabeth. But he found writing very, very difficult. He lacked confidence as a writer. He would write these drafts and then rip them up in disgust. Perhaps he misspelled receive. And then you see in the diaries, that particular piece, which he was commissioned for the centenary of the Rugby Football Union. It was initially published in a booklet called Touchdown, edited by the Welsh Rugby International Cliff Morgan. And Richard writes it, I think, in Mexico and sends it off. And then he gets this telegram come back from Cliff Morgan, which says it's wonderful. And Richard is so thrilled. He admits to himself, he says, Cliff Morgan is no Cyril Connolly, he's no great literary editor. And yet, to have that sort of stamp of approval was an endorsement of what Richard thought he had as a talent as a writer. But he found it very, very difficult. I think he never quite got the time, he never got into his stride as a writer. But we are hoping, possibly next year, to look at publishing a volume which would bring together many of the correspondence, the letters in the archives at Swansea University, and bring those together with a selection of his published writings. Because as you say, that particular piece is a very fine and witty piece about rugby, and he could write brilliantly about things that he felt passionately about.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have to bring this conversation to a close, which seems a great shame. Sometimes it feels sort of slightly rude or odd to talk about someone when they're not with you. But I hope if he was listening in, Richard would get a sense of the love and admiration and respect that everybody here shares for him and his work. This is a tremendous book. It's a big book, but every word is a jewel. And you can dip into it wherever you want and get something from it. Thank you, Chris, for this book. And thank you, Robert and Rhiannon, for sharing such special memories. It's been a very special hour. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Signing this book and continuing the conversation.
One final quote.
Yes.
It's my favourite quote of Richard about himself. When the question came up about his involvement with a possible theatre to be added to the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama, he said, "I hope they'll do Faustus. Faustus is the only play that I don't have to rehearse." I am Faustus!